And I will welcome all who are watching this recorded event, as well as all of you who are here live. Just to give you a little background about the book from which we are going to be hearing readings, it started with the pandemic. On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus outbreak a global pandemic. And then in California on March 19th, we became the first state to issue a blanket stay-at-home order. It started with the pandemic, and it also started with a newspaper column in the Benicia Herald. Shortly after the announcement was made about the stay-at-home order, I emailed Galen Cusick, who is the editor of the Herald, and I said to him, as the fears grow around the coronavirus and tensions increase about shelter in place, I've been imagining a column to appear in each edition of the Herald, 3 times a week that is, that would voice and speak to the fears, tensions, inspirations, hopes, and oddities we are experiencing. Poets, writers, people who had never previously written for a publication sent in material, and then the word spread. And people not only from Benicia and the surrounding area, but from a wider area sent in their material. Not everything that was submitted was published, but everyone who submitted something was published at least once. Giving voice to our community was one of the purposes of the column. And eventually, more than 60 writers from diverse ages, backgrounds, and circumstances contributed to that newspaper column in the Benicia Herald. It was called Going the Distance. And the gathered writings from that column between April 1st, the day we began, and leading up to Election Day 2020. Those are the writings that appear in the book, Yearning to Breathe Free. We expected the newspaper column to run for 2 to 3 months, or until a vaccine or effective treatment was developed. That didn't happen that quickly. And as the weeks passed, the focus of the column widened, taking in embedded racism, economic hardship, climate crisis, and threats to democracy. And after the murder of George Floyd, the title of the column expanded. It got a subheading. It was Going the Distance, Yearning to Breathe Free. And that meant to breathe free of all the chokeholds that threaten us as individuals, as communities, as a nation, and as a planet. And by the way, the newspaper column is still running, Going the Distance, now with the subheading, Not There Yet. That's how the newspaper column ran. And then we changed into a book. And I'd like to call on Mary Eichbauer, who is the editor-in-chief of Benicia Literary Arts, to just give some commentary about what it was like changing a collection of newspaper columns into a book. And you are muted, Mary.
Now, thank you.
Okay, good. We want you to have voice.
Me too. Thank you, Mary Susan. Working on this anthology was really kind of a profound experience. I just want to thank Mary Susan for having the foresight to realize that the time would come when we would need to reflect on the unique events that we all lived through separately and together, and the feelings they evoked, and the losses that we experienced as a result of these events. Yearning to Breathe Free brought together personal responses of a community day by day during the thick of uncertainty and doubt. So these testimonials really stand as a historical record from our small corner of America. And they're a raw, unmediated testimony to hope and fear, to our anger and despair, inspired by events as they unfolded. Many people feel as if we've moved on. Of course, there's no definitive moving on from COVID yet. And all the other things that we were reacting to, the drought, fires, racism, global warming, political extremism, all those things are still with us. The book, Yearning to be Free, took the community's ephemeral responses in the newspaper and gave them a more permanent form. So I felt like the newspaper column and the book had different functions. First, they had a voice, people had a voice in time in the newspaper, and now we can look back and perhaps we've reached a place where we can process the emotions that we experienced day by day, and we can move forward and we can learn from what we felt then and what we need to do in the future as we combat and react to the same sorts of issues. So as we come together again, slowly, we're still processing our experiences of fear, of isolation, and I'm really happy that I could play even a small part in putting these responses into a more durable form. I want to express my admiration and my thanks to all the writers who contributed their words to offer solidarity and comfort to our community. And one more thing, thanks to Deborah Fouché for her work on designing the book and the cover, and thanks to Tom Stanton for his work on the cover design as well. I'm really happy to be here today and to see all of you, and I'll give it back to Mary Susan now.
Okay. And I will go ahead and ask Constance to bring up that first slide, the cover of the book. And we will take ourselves back to 2020 and remember what it was like. The first reading will come from Wednesday, April 8th, 2020. At that point, we were almost 3 weeks into sheltering in place. And that reading, or that book's page, has the title, Waiting in the Unfamiliar. Lois Requist will be reading.
Thank you, Mary Susan, and thank you for all the work you've done. You know, I know continuing to have this column in the paper is work and is appreciated, and you've just stuck with this, and thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who worked on the book, because I think it's a wonderful journal of what happened during that time. I walk in Benicia a lot and in the downtown area, but it just not having, and I continued to walk while we were at the beginning of the quarantine, but by myself and never got close to anybody, kind of avoided First Street, but it just seemed so different to do it, without very many people around. So that's what led me to write Streets I Have Never Walked Before.
Yeah.
Silent now, familiar but still, the sound of a human voice alerts me. Where is it? Where are they? Am I safe? The patter of 1,000 voices, footfalls halted by something we can't see, science fiction. Across the street, a mute baseball field, no cracking bats, no one on base, no runs, no outs, nothing. The craving for normalcy growls like an empty stomach.
And the death toll from COVID that day totaled 19,282. Wednesday, April 15th. We are talking thematically about somewhat dazed, and Sherry Hoffman will read.
Thank you, Mary Susan and Mary, for, I'm really proud to be part of this very innovative and necessary project. I wrote this during the first month of the shutdown when it was going to be over in 6 weeks. And I work at home as a writer. So when my professor husband taught on Zoom in the front room and my child was homeschooling in the back, my domain became very small. And in this sandwich, I noticed that my sense of smell and hearing became very sharp, and my attention span and my patience took a dive, and time expanded and contracted like a lava lamp, and I had to write about it. So my piece was called Shards of Days, and I deliberately spelled it both ways because they are true. During the first few weeks, it took 7 days to do 1 day's worth of tasks. A single day could have several tasks: laundry, bills, organizing spaghetti inventory. But that 1 day was dropped on the ground and it shattered like a bath bomb. Shards that broke and splintered and spread out over 7 days. Every day had unfinished jobs in it. Not one task got started and finished in a single 24-hour period. On any given day, you'd see open doors, open cabinets in mid-cleaning, open flaps on my vitamin pill box in mid-fill. There were open folders in my brain, too, preoccupied with worries about people on the front lines. Dishwasher door hanging open, not sure if dishes were coming or going. Washing machine door open. I had added soap and I walked away without even starting it. Salad cut up with a fork standing upright in a carrot waiting for bite number 2. It looked like the rapture had happened. Our house people had been sucked away in mid-task. And the sounds. I'm now in tune with my home life. I can tell what my husband is drinking, hot tea, and out of which cup, a large plastic yellow Dickies cup, just by how he swallows. I listen to how long and deep our cat is digging in the litter box, and I know exactly what she's about to deliver. I don't like that I know this. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I said to my husband, I am turning over a new leaf for our upcoming week. I'm going to get up early, shower, make my own coffee, and take care of a very large to-do list so that I can think straight. Last week, I lost the plot. I'm going to let last week go. It just didn't. And my husband finishes my thought because he gets me. Last week just didn't. Yes, and this week just might.
And the total US deaths from COVID as of that date was 34,731. We move on in our journal to Sunday, April 19th, where there are words of comfort and hope. And let's see here. I think we need to go back to April 19th.
Yes.
There we are. Good.
I'm Krista O'Connor. I teach high school in Petaluma, and I know Sandra Onfong. She has come to my classroom several times now over the years to help my students with poetry out loud. So when she found out that I had written this one poem, she suggested that I send it in even though I don't live in Benicia. So this poem is Walking, Petaluma. Wind chimes, comforting and simultaneously lonely. My dog and I walk alone, together yet alone, noticing homes, streets, cars, others walking, yet mostly empty silence, wind, chimes. In the last 10 or so days, really only 10, a shift as I walk and cross streets or change direction, mostly not from apprehension, but to respect the space of others, either the young family, the older couple, who perhaps pushing the stroller or walking their dog cannot change direction as quickly. So I cross away from them. Others do the same for me, but here and there where we were smiling and offering a friendly greeting only a week or two ago, now more silence. Folks retreating into their own thoughts, own heads, own safety. Passing the creamery, still steaming, working, emanating its somewhat comforting sour milk aroma. Workers there still collecting the milk from our hardworking cows and dairy folk, processing it into cheese so solidly, delicious, nutritious. How can that smell impress itself upon my psyche in that way, make me feel so grateful for its familiar presence? 35 years of passing it by, perhaps, and what is familiar and unchanged is somewhat comforting. The high school. I used to teach there 2 weeks ago, before learning distantly began. Passing the courts, tennis and basketball, I see two blonde brothers lose the basketball over the fence. It bounces toward the street. A man on the other side of the chain link pulls down both sleeves, retrieves the ball without actually touching it, and tosses it back to the boys. Thank you.
And at the end of that day, 42,967 in the United States had died from COVID-19. We will now move past May 1st to May the 8th. And Galen Kusik wrote a poem on that day that I later turned out, was the first poem he had written. Galen Kusik, as you might remember from the introduction or from your knowledge of Benicia, is the editor of the Benicia Herald, in which these columns appeared. He wanted to be here today, but some other matters took precedence, and he asked if I would read Essential Worker. He wrote this having in mind medical workers, healthcare workers, grocery workers, delivery people, postal deliverers, first responders. But a friend said after reading it, he didn't know he was writing about himself too. Essential worker. On the way to work again to do this noble deed, but it really is just my job to work and keep us free. On my shift at work again, I hope I make it home. They say I'm essential, but I just feel alone. If I make it home tonight, I'll pray for just one more, and just maybe one day tears of joy will pour. On the road to work again, I pray for all those souls. I think about the future. Who knows what it will hold? The world that we all live in, the roads that some must travel. It's in my heart to make it before it all unravels. On the way to work again. And at the end of that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 ran to 80,727. On May 22nd, writings came together that kind of described being at low ebb. Beth Grimm will read.
Thank you. When the pandemic hit, I wasn't impacted as strongly as a lot of other people. I empathized deeply with those who had so many struggles. I felt lost for the many deaths that were happening every day, as much as one can feel when it hasn't hit home yet. I felt for my kids and grandkids who were trapped in their homes in opposite ends of the country. I live alone, so I had my house to myself with all of the usual creature comforts unaltered. I walk every day to get fresh air. That's what fuels me. I'm an avid iPhone photographer, so I have my camera with me at all times and continually strive to capture images that are upbeat that I can share with others. There were some available during the pandemic, like the flowers that didn't give in. I was coping as well as anyone I knew with the pandemic, even as restrictive as it was. So on April 21, 2020, it was not promising to be a completely devastating day. I walked out my front door and over to the Bayside Promenade in Benicia. I saw no one. The streets were empty, but that was not unusual. Benicia had become a ghost town. I walked the 8 blocks to where the boatyard is, and that's when it began to hit me that this might be the grayest day yet. I walked from the promenade over to the pier, and that is what led me to this essay poem. To this very day, whenever I read it, it takes me right back to that terrible dark gray in April of 2020. It was the deepest isolation I've ever felt. When I ventured out today, the tide is low. When I ventured out today, it was a gray and overcast afternoon, the direct opposite of the sunshine of yesterday. I thought to myself, every day feels so different in this season of governmental mandates, unanticipated shortages, and shelter-in-place orders. I expected empty streets, sidewalks, parks, signs banning parking in places where people used to gather by the waterfront and such. But what I see and feel goes deeper as I walk. Heading into the promenade, I notice that the tide is out quite far. Having taken so many pictures of the Red Baron, a town landmark, in different lighting conditions, it doesn't fully register that the front end of the boat is nearly aground. Rather, my eyes were riveted on the churning ridges of the white caused by the ragged currents just past the waterline. The swirling curves draw me into them. By the time I get to the pier, an uncomfortable heaviness is creeping into my bones. It's far too dark for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I pass through an opening in the walkway by a bold parking lot closed during the pandemic sign and yellow police tape cordoning off the parking lot. Suddenly, I am lost, no one in sight in any direction. Hurrying to the end of the pier, I scan the shoreline like a seagull gliding overhead, looking for some juicy morsel, some hope. I see things I never noticed before. Too much black mud, dead plants, sticks and rocks covered by sludge in the vast gap between the shore and the water. I sit down on a bench and my head drops into my waiting hands. I can't help thinking that even the waterline is afraid to come close. Is it practicing safe distancing? It seems confused and leery of the shore, maybe of me. Today, the tide is lower than I have ever seen it. I am paralyzed by the desolation. I wonder if the tide can go any lower.
And as of May 22nd, the total US deaths from COVID-19 totaled 99,673. On Wednesday, June 24th, we've had more than 3 months of social distancing and masked faces. We've had a month since George Floyd's murder, and we've had months and months and months of family separations at the border. Will we remember is the theme for that day, and Sherry Sheehan will read.
This short poem of mine starts out with Benched Man. You may remember that as the picture, the photograph logo for the column. The title of the poem is Masked. Benched man replaced by masked woman standing for liberty. Coronavirus-like spikes in her crown. Newly confined by garb required against the pandemic. Do you remember her nose and mouth? How beautiful they looked, welcoming all who yearned to breathe free. Thank you.
And as of that date, the total US deaths from COVID-19 was 124,992. On Friday, June 26th, the theme for the day that emerged was "With Every Breath," and Lee Salomon will read.
I wrote this poem, or rather I drafted it on Juneteenth, which was a day I hadn't paid much attention to in the past. I wanted to honor how so many Americans were, in spite of the health risks, going out to protest the murder of George Floyd, and I was feeling guilty that I myself was staying home. So my excuse was I'm sewing masks, and I was sewing a lot of masks. It was my way to feel useful in the midst of all the insanity, the early weeks of the pandemic. Safe breathing on Juneteenth. The social fabric is in turmoil and needs some serious mending. I bend over my still singing treadle and assemble a few more face masks for my daughter, the hospice nurse, and her airline pilot hubby, cute ones for the grandkids, and another for a friend. While thousands are dying from COVID-19, brave souls around the globe are protesting the senseless murder of Black people. My heart is with you, my brethren, demonstrating in every state, plus DC where I grew up. This Juneteenth, I march with you in spirit as I sit down to sew these silly masks. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and more. It's too late to sew masks for you, but I fold and iron this cotton cloth and stitch the seams to enable a friend, a relative, a neighbor to go outside and breathe a little more safely tomorrow so we all can breathe easier.
As of that date, 126,169 deaths in the United States had been reported from COVID. On Friday, July 3rd, we are in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and in the midst of altercations and conversations about symbols of the Confederacy, Janae Bryce is going to read a piece by Carolyn Randall Williams that appeared in the New York Times.
Thank you, Mary Susan, and thank you, fellow poets. I have to say, when Mary Susan asked me to read this, I had never read it before, and it resonated with me for many reasons. So I absolutely agreed to do so, and take a listen. You want a Confederate monument? My body is a Confederate monument. I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. I am a Black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow.
And on that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 totaled 130,071. Wednesday, July 8th, we have some poems from the heart. And Kathy Monroe will read.
Thank you, Mary Susan. I wrote this poem about anger. Anger is never a primary emotion. It's always a secondary emotion, but we had plenty of primary emotions to stoke it. The sadness, at this point, it's almost 4 months in, the sadness over all the losses, the horror at the violence and unrest, the fear of all the climate crises and the economic crises, all the confusion about the conflicting pieces of advice, as well as trying to tease out the lies that were circulating, you know, all leading to frustration over not being in control of any of it. And all of those set us up for anger. I could feel anger in my own heart, as well as I could see it in others, no matter if we tried very hard to not give into it, it was still there. So this is a poem about anger. Anger, the bastard child of that troubled union, before reality left expectations crying on her bed, before chaos abandoned hope alone in the street, before frustration beat up effort on the job, and heartache conquered humanity at every turn. Our daily lives co-opted by an enemy too small to see, major sacrifices made not just for ourselves, but for the protection of us all, hoping together we could rebound, our progress wiped out by selfishness and stupidity. The nightmare of a brutal death awakening us from the dream of a just society to the frustrating discovery of the untruths laid before our unseeing eyes for decades, our blindness allowing for pain and injustice. A sense of moral righteousness stoked by the looting, burning, and violence in the street, so that even the peaceful are greeted by heavy-handed tactics befitting criminals. An assault on our belief that all lives are sacred. Anger oozes from the cracks in the street, the bars and the jail cells, the TV screen showing a party or a protest, and our worn out front stoops from lingering too long, until that anger settles in the heart, ready to boil over at any moment. Thank you.
133,079 was the number of total deaths in the US from COVID-19 to that date. Friday, July 10th, we turn to Dreamscape, and Tom Stanton will read.
Thank you, Mary Susan. I'm going to introduce with an epigraph written on July 1st, 2021. Dear poet, the sounds of plants stretching, breathing, without airplane, car honking, nor siren blaring doom, just the silence. And I could actually hear the footsteps of lizards. There were people during that time who, like you, enjoyed the silence. I'm not sure I realized how quiet it was. I have never been happier in my life than those days of quiet and gorgeous, divine stillness, with just the wear of the breezes, feeding the time clocks of humans, building our boat to sail, wondrous journeys to exotic places, while in the quiet we painted our poems together in the garden. I refuse to feel guilty for finally being happy. It was a beautiful time in the garden. I will always remember I was devastated when it ended. But now, and the poem in the book, page 47. Changi, Thursday in Cannes. I woke up to sleep, fantail orange Fanta. How this has grown with so little water. Tepid Henry knew, placing each hue, wing beats in a vacuum, bluest of blues, plumage magnificat, sailing well past dawn. In can chime seal, sleep to wake, wake to wake, chrysanthemum blooms, woken to sleep. Changi Friday in Cannes. I woke up to slumber, fantail yellow, orange Fanta, swimming ballerina. How this has grown with so little water. Tepid Henry knew, royal upon me, scales of hue, upon this docket, found you, deleterious mossed deer, gleaming platinum in the dew. Thank you.
And on that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 was 134,907. Friday, July 31st. Aspiring. Shauna Swetek will read.
Thank you. This poem was written in response to the George Floyd murder on May 25th, 2020, and the Black Lives Matter movement. I found myself at a place where I did not understand what people of color were still going through. I thought racism was primarily in the South. I did not know how pervasive it was, and that it was here in Northern California where I lived. I was shocked. I realized then how much I needed to learn, and for the first time went to a local Juneteenth celebration. I started reading books by Ibram X. Kendi, poetry by Ross Gay, Major Jackson. I heard the term white fragility for the first time. And I have to say the things I was reading about and the stories I was hearing was uncomfortable, did not feel good, but no, I'm not fragile. I wanted to, and I need to hear the truth. And so I wrote this poem. All the glory. I never did, which is to say, among other things, it's unfathomable. And by that I mean, tell me what you can. You can't say too much, which is only to say, show me what living is like, multi-generation, the cellular embedments which can, must, will. And since we're talking today, let me stop here to say these matters are uncomfortable, but I am not fragile and it can't be turned away from. So now let's eye to eye. And by that, I mean only tell me all of it, which is to say, I want to see you, to see you, to see, to finally see. Thank you.
At the end of that day, 154,575 was the count of total US deaths from COVID-19. Wednesday, August 5th, brought us some assurances. Dee Allen will read for us.
Piccolo Orso, Italian for little bear. The front windowsills of houses in Noe Valley, San Francisco's high-end suburb on the hill above the Mission, are galleries for placards these days, held fast to pane glass with Scotch tape or tack board admonishments to neighbors unnerved by the continued march of Corona, bearing words that soothe. Everything will be okay. We will survive. We will get through this. And then Mr. Teddy Bear makes his appearance. Stuffed wool, thread, and varnished button eyes comprises our friend's being. Little Teddy sits on the windowsill of a house, soaking up the morning sun, just chilling. Passing small children on Jersey Street enjoy his cute, adorable, calming presence. Tiny fingers point up at their find. Little Teddy kicking it, calm and lounging next to a hand-drawn placard reminding block residents what Hunters Point, Sunnydale, Seminary, Eastmont, and I have always known to be fact. Black Lives Matter. A child's bedtime companion moved on up to the front of the house. He's on constant display like a hard plastic preening mannequin in Neiman Marcus's storefront window. There in the windowsill as a plush symbol for these strange days when breathing the air without a mask on around others is unhealthy. Little Teddy reassures us that these days don't have to be scary. He tells us non-verbally that if we stay safe, if we keep our connections, despite the isolation, despite the miles, everything will be okay. That poem was called Piccolo Orso, Little Bear. From This Might Be Your Ears, I'm Dee Allen. Thanks for listening.
And the total US death count from COVID on that day totaled 159,415. August 16th brought us reflections on staying power. And Johanna Ely will read.
Sometimes I wake up early, just before dawn, and this poem was written in that time of silence. Light, hope, and love. Praise the light that comes early after the stars go out, before the first bird wakes and sings its joy to the setting moon. Praise the glimmer of hope we dream before dawn, when night casts its shadow along buildings and empty streets, in dark rooms where loneliness embraces those who cannot sleep. Praise love. It is the song that stays late, the candle that burns after the light is gone. Thank you.
And at the end of that day, 170,662 was the total of US deaths from COVID-19. Friday, August 21st, we find in that page, those poems, this reflection, this being, this looking forward and backward of future, present, and past. Sandra Ungfang will read.
Thank you. This poem was quite prescient. In 2020, I didn't know I was about to become a grandmother, a first-time grandmother. And I tried to really capture the sense of utter shock and confusion that so many of you have captured in your poems at the very start of the pandemic. As an anthropology major, I look at life through the lens of how future generations will interpret the artifacts of the present. Letter to my great-grandchildren. Dear Chance and Aurora, maybe your grandparents told you about this, maybe not. When they were young couples raising your mom and dad, the the world changed overnight. One day we hiked the yellow hills, danced to jam bands, marched by the thousands in protest. We lounged in cafes and hugged our friends just the way you do. But the world changed overnight. It was like a war, everyone fighting the enemy of illness. We had to stay at home and walk 6 feet apart. The stores were shuttered and the theaters boarded up. Restaurants closed because they couldn't pay the rent. The enemy was a virus that knew how to kill. At first we cried, shocked with grief and fear. Then the clocks melted. We bit our nails and held our children close. Some folks died. Others comforted us with their words. Gradually, we came to our senses and did what we could. We found new ways to visit, read poems to our neighbors over fences, played music in driveways. Though parks were closed, we still went on walks. Everywhere there were masked faces. The dogs thought it funny that humans were muzzled. The trees sighed deep sighs, and the wildflowers bloomed in hues we've never seen. Thank you.
And as of that date, 175,913 was the total of US deaths from COVID-19. Wednesday, August 26th, we were in a state of emergency in California, called on August 19th because of wildfires. Roger Straw will read.
I really enjoyed Sandra's wide scope. This is more of a snapshot from a day. Mary Susan mentioned the wildfires. On August 16th, 2,500 lightning strikes hit here in the Bay Area. And in the next 3 days, 12,000 more across the state, leading to 585 wildfires. This in our home was 2 weeks before we ordered electric air purifiers for our home on that day when the sky turned orange. So this is the snapshot of August 26, the ghosts of you. The ghosts of your existence, anonymous, spectral, never known, arrive hot and deadly in a silent fog and surround me, invade my world, and trap me here in my air-conditioned home. Poor me, not. The particulate remnants of your home, the smoldering bits of your walls, the white bits of you that gather on my car and enter my aging lungs, surround me whole. These ghostly hints of your loss come filter my thoughts and possess me and haunt what's left of everyday pursuits. Poor me, no. Yet we live with your ghosts. Your loss is ours in miniature, but nonetheless lethal, a floating threat to body and soul, invasive in and out. Sadly, your massive loss is now a mind-numbing, choking, ghostly surround.
And at the end of that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 numbered 180,288. Friday, August 28th brings us perspectives, and we'll hear from Kathy Dana.
Roger just mentioned August 16th as the day that the sky was orange. that happened to be the morning that I taught creative writing at my high school in Alameda, and we were all on Zoom. We had been on Zoom for 3 months, and we woke up that day, and there was, it was like we didn't wake up. It was just still dark. And then the fires began, and I began to think back on what we had lost. It was coming to me strongly that things were not how they were. I remember how it was. I remember how it was, anticipating the subtle slide into summer, my time, my favorite time, favorite season, rippled with festivals and celebrations, with blue skies and sunshine and ripening fruit and outdoor farmers markets. The outdoors calling, always calling to me, come on, come on. Can you come out and play? My heart beating fast, saying, yes, yes, oh yes. I remember how it was, anticipating the magic of memorable dates. Anniversary of our first date, May 18th, spring ski trip so many years ago, our wedding anniversary, June 14th, wedding in the Redwoods, his birthday, my birthday, our son's birthday, our hearts barely able to contain the joy of June and July. I remember how it was, anticipating the string of summer festivals, Mother's Day on Park Street, dancing in the streets, 4th of July parade and Beetle bliss with the Sun Kings, our annual trek to the Oregon Country Fair, home to all whose hearts are open, Scottish games attuned to the Celtic drumbeat, hardly strictly bluegrass, where an infinite sea of faces graces Golden Gate Park. I remember how it was, when we could all freely hug, could be close, could embrace each other in the ecstatic joy of sharing together the day, the sky, the meadows, the music, the joy of human hearts that drink together from the overflowing fountain of the human spirit.
And at the end of that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 numbered 182,352. Saturday, August 30th, we were at a time of multiple crises in the land. This is a theme of crisis response, and we'll hear from Mary Harrell.
In the 2+ years since I wrote the poem, My Country Calls, the threats to Lady Liberty and all that she stands for have become ever more critical. As I anticipate voting in this year's midterm elections, I am plagued by the question, is this my country's last call? In August 2020, feeling America in crisis, I wrote, my country calls. I hear it in the pleading eyes of children, caged. I hear it in George Floyd's last breath. I hear it in Lady Liberty's tears, ringing, breathless, in my ears. Vote. Vote. Vote.
By the end of that day, 183,720 deaths in the US from COVID-19 had been reported. Friday, September 11th, those lightning strikes on August 16th got us to that day on September 9th, which was the day of the orange sky, the day that it never felt like morning broke. Nancy Tolan will read for us about the air supply.
Thank you. I wrote this poem during the 2020 California wildfire season. By mid-August, California was fighting 367 known wildfires, many of which had been sparked by lightning storms. The lightning complex fire was tearing through the wine country at this time, and the Bay Area was engulfed in smoke. The air quality was hazardous and extremely unhealthy. I titled this poem Nectar. Nectar. Late August morning, my once vibrant garden cries out in distress, cries out for water, love, and attention. Sun-starved and smoke-drenched from wildfires, everything's wilting in the toxic, unbreathable air. I emerge from the sliding glass door wearing a large N95 mask, dark sunglasses, and my wide-brimmed purple sun hat, looking like a giant Kafkaesque insect. A brave hummingbird zips toward the bird feeder, but then stops and hovers near me, studying me, deciding if it is safe to sip nectar with me so close by. I smile behind my mask, amused that the lovely iridescent winged bird does not recognize me. I want to say, hey, I'm not a cockroach. I'm that two-legged creature who nurtures the garden and refills the nectar in your bird feeder. But even my purple hat looks dusky today with all that smoke. And the bird darts to the plum tree and lights on a high branch to wait for this giant cockroach to leave.
The total US deaths from COVID-19 that day ran to 193,587. Moving on to Sunday, September 13th. There were many journeys of the mind and journeys of the spirit that were going on, and Carol Geig will read.
This is a very tender time for me, as I'm sure it was for all of us, but the homelessness of people really came home, I guess, because I felt the loneliness and the isolation that they feel all the time, even now. And I was struck that these people that I met at that time, they craved conversation and respect and dignity as much as anything else. So that was the time I learned the difference between calling someone the homeless and people without homes. A destitute, this is called Compassion Survives. A destitute man crouched under the causeway connecting the drugstore and Safeway. He'd squeezed his emaciated frame between the watermelon and cantaloupe bins. The causeway provided a shield from the blistering sun, but no relief from the 90-degree heat. He wore ragged jeans, dilapidated shoes, and a faded t-shirt, rife with holes. "Hi there," I began. "Can I get you something to eat?" "Okay," he stuttered. Once inside, I purchased a sandwich, a soda, and a bottle of hand sanitizer. but when I returned, he'd left. So I deposited the items where he'd been sitting. Went to Safeway more often than usual over the next week. When he was there, it was the same as before. So I'd just wave and head into the store. One day he nodded at me as I went by and didn't glance furtively behind me as he did so. At last, I thought, and repeated what had now become a mantra. If you've left already, I'll just leave some things right here. A few days after that, he waved at me as I was returning to my car. I caught just a hint of a smile from him. He'll never know that, but with a simple grin, he'd given me more than I ever could have given him.
At the end of that day, the US deaths from COVID-19 totaled 194,738. Sunday, September 20th, looking at tolls and gifts, we will hear from Brandon Green.
Thank you. I wrote this sort of at the beginning of the pandemic because it's like a lot of life transitions happening. I lost people to COVID. I was working from home, so I had the kind of opportunity to be present with my children in a way that I always had wanted, but was unable to, sort of in this breadwinner role that I took on, but never really wanted, and it just sort of really reframed kind of both how I wanted to live my life, kind of like some of the fractures and how I'd been living my life. Ultimately, I ended up divorcing and just, all of those things. So it was like all of the kind of adult loss that comes with sort of like middle age and all the things that people had to confront in the pandemic. So it's called What I Can't Live Without. If a year ago you would have asked me what I can live without, there's no doubt that I would have confidently, boldly, almost in a shout, declared, I don't know. I mean, certainly between the inevitable ebb and flow of life and the close but not quite living the dream of career, house, kids, and a wife, I've accepted that I have to spend 8 to 9 years a day with people who, if I was fired or retired, would likely not find me to see or say hey in exchange for the 3 or 4 hours with the 2 little people I would cease my life or yours for before the ink dries on this pad. The letters in DAD often feel like an acronym for dogged and distant. To feed, clothe, and shelter them takes a level of persistence paired with the palpable and precise insistence on denying the impact that my absence has inflicted. Pre-pandemic, you couldn't have told me that I wasn't super present, but since having the shelter in place, I've noticed that my place of shelter is more helter-skelter than I'd like to admit. If I take a step back a bit, COVID-19 has exposed at least a few years prior to 2019 aspects of my life are gasping for air. It took the longest year of my life to demonstrate just how much I was longing for life different than the one I constructed. How can I return to the office suite, denying myself the sweet faces of my children, riding scooters or running in the park midday, not losing hours of my life commuting on the freeway? I can live without the rat race, without the digitization of my mother and grandfather's face, without the absence of a warm embrace, or if I'm completely honest, a cold one, a loud annoying fight with the in-person chance to make it all right. I can live without living without all the things the pre-pandemic I was living without. That mental, physical, and emotional drought. So I suppose the real question is, what can I and what am I willing to live with?
$200,105 total US deaths from COVID-19 that day. On Friday, September 25th, and we'll go back to that. Thank you. There were just lots of indications of the world flipped out. James Quinn is not able to be with us today because he is ill, and Kathleen Herman has stepped in to read his poem.
I was privileged enough to be able to work with James in his classroom as a volunteer, and he modeled such strong values. He was such a great role model for his third graders. And they were totally engaged. He was respectful. They reflected that respect right back. So the challenge was in the pandemic with distance teaching, how to maintain an inclusive classroom, an engaging classroom, and make students accountable for their work and for standards and goals. And so from that situation and all those challenges came this poem from James, In the Land of Zeros and Ones. Sound waves echo back and forth through the electrical grids. Microphones on mute, astute teachers stare at the kids. Listen to me, sit down, not a sound. This is your online class. Do your work to pass. 2020 has flipped its lid. We zoom in and out of the grid to mute our microphone, only to log out and feel all alone. Walking out with a task to wear a mask, only to repeat into the bleak. Roll call 2020, Jordan, Lenny, and Benny. This is where up is down and everything upside down. Turn around, inside out and all about. The work is tons in the world of zeros and ones.
$204,479 total US deaths from COVID-19 on that date. Sunday, October 4th, we find expressions from the core, and Aquila Lewis Ross will read.
Good afternoon. Hope everyone is well. I know you're not supposed to have a favorite poem, but this might be one of my favorite poems. In another life, I was a visual artist, but I'm not. But I love to collaborate with artists who fulfill those needs and those areas. Ekphrastic writing, ekphrastic poetry is my favorite. And I don't know, this poem came to me in images. I'm also a mom, so it's really hard to find the time to write. And during the pandemic, I actually had time to write, and believe it or not. And this poem came to me in colors. My daughter also loves rainbows, so do I. So this is something that we share, but hopefully you guys can enjoy this. Give an artist a canvas. Give an artist a canvas and freedom to create as they please. Practice makes perfect. My body was the canvas, at first to be used to harm. Cells held on to pain from generations past. Ancestors spoke truth to power. In and through me, it glowed from within, became my protection, adding another layer of gray-haired wisdom. Paint me gold, carrying riches buried and treasures never opened. See the key? Rich people always hide it in unattainable places. Paint me liquefied, fluid as water. Blue-green like the ocean, a favorite color. Peaceful, tranquil. I could stay here until pruning no longer is beautiful on skin. Saw a post about a mama who made rainbow spaghetti for dinner. I wish I were that creative and had the energy to be this dedicated. But I will do anything to see my little princess smile. Paint me rainbow. May I shine bright for all to see. Thank you.
And the death total in the US on that date was 210,533 from COVID-19. Wednesday, October 14th, and I think I have a missing page here on my sheet. We have October 7th. Disturbance all over. And on that day, Janae Bryce tweeted, and she will read that tweet for us.
Good afternoon again. So reading this again brought me back to a time of overwhelming sadness. We were witnessing the wildfires, as my fellow poets have already stated. I am asthmatic, so not only did I wake up to ash on my car, but particulates in my lungs. It was hard to breathe, to talk, to even cry. It was a terrible time. Not to mention the isolation, the separation, the segregation that we were all feeling. It was just magnified on that day when it was just dark. I remember trying to find a bike. I couldn't find a hula hoop. I couldn't find a jump rope. Everything was sold out. There was no going to gym. So I was trying anything to exercise. And I, quite frankly, was sad. On the verge of tears, I walked out the front door and glanced up. I give you a Tuesday text. I won't be bogged down in the reasons why. For when I looked up in today's sky, I saw the sun, and it was one in vermilion again. Thank you.
And on that day, the total US deaths from COVID-19 totaled 212,634. Now moving on to October 14th. Often in this book, well, often in the newspaper columns, poems were put with one another because they seemed to be working on the same theme, either contrastingly or harmoniously. And today we will hear two poems in praise. The first read by Nina Serrano.
Thank you. This was written October 14th, 2020. Leilani, in praise. Yesterday, the smoky air cleared. I visited my new 7th great-grandchild for the first time, wearing a mask. Gathering safely in the lush garden of ripe peaches, pigs, figs, squashes, pumpkins, and tomatoes. As mornix and hummingbirds flitted among the flowers, seated, I held her mellow and beautiful being in my arms, and I said her name, Leilani, out loud. Sweet Leilani, heavenly flower, I sang to her, but could not catch her infant smell through the mask. Peering into her face, searching for resemblances, I saw different expressions of elusive family members race by in her random expressions. She fits so snugly against my body, as if she'd always been there. Though only 18 days old, she always had. When her mother spoke, she turned toward her, soon was nursing contentedly in her tender embrace, falling peacefully asleep. I left with a bag full of sweet, ripe peaches, my heart full, the word resilient on my mind. Thank you.
And then from Mary Eichbauer.
Thank you, Mary Susan. I wrote this poem to express my deep foreboding when Ruth Bader Ginsburg left us, that suddenly our rights, everyone's rights, were going to be challenged and undone. And at the time, I couldn't have known how true that was. Homage to RBG. She held back the storm alone, and we knew she was a hero, but we didn't know how lonely it would feel standing here without her. She didn't get upset about it, just did what she needed to do, pretending when she had to, because her goal was freedom. That's all that mattered, not being tied down to some man's idea of a life, winning justice, undoing the chains. And now they can't wait to put her memory in the ground, now that she can no longer face them down with her steely eyes, her strength that finally failed her. She knew they were waiting, even if we didn't.
And the total US deaths from COVID-19 that day ran to 217,895. On Wednesday, October 28th, we were anticipating the elections. We thought that everything might change with the results of that election. And we had some apprehension. We will hear first from Ramona Lapierre, then from Kathleen Herman, and then I will wrap it up.
Thank you, Mary. September 2020 brought scorching wildfires, burnt orange skies, and the shocking death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, AKA the notorious RBG. While the nation mourned, the GOP wasted no time in stealing yet another nomination to secure a partisan majority on the court. The sorrow was palpable. In October, lies and misinformation fell like toxic rain from the atmosphere of Republican rhetoric. Doubt and fear, hate and division were dark clouds in the brooding sky as COVID deaths continued to rise. 6 months had passed since my mom's death, herself named Ruth, and an RBG admirer, so my heart was still heavy with that loss. My poem, Late October Wind, was written after an October storm that seemed to me to be the physical manifestation of the emotional whirlwind that swirled around the 2020 presidential election. It's rattling my bones, the late October wind, battering the roses, shivering my skin, twisting the hibiscus, howling through the doors, moaning through the windows amidst this pandemic pre-election storm, threatening our democracy, dismantling sacred norms, abandoning facts and integrity in eerie, foreboding tones.
My poem is called Free Fall, and it was written in honor of President Jimmy Carter's 96th birthday. He just turned 98 on October 1st. He never has stopped leading. And in that, I think of Jimmy Carter and Ruth Bader Ginsburg as having a commonality, both leaders throughout their lives. Free fall. We have waited 4 hard years to rescue our battered country from the petulant man-child whose toxic whims, psychotic rants, and routine chaos jettisoned our proud democracy into a bottomless free fall. 3 tiers of governance eroded to fragile partisan facades. Oh, how we have waited to make our mark, to make it right. Not so fast. Mail it and risk fraud. Show up and risk health. Black and brown voters endure hours on their feet, defying Jim Crow's shadow. Drop boxes are endangered in Texas and Ohio. Bogus ones appear in California. Iran, Russia, and China hedge their bets. Jimmy, with your slow smile and unassuming manner, you have restored strangled voices from Sierra Leone to Bangladesh. Now you stand with us, forming a more perfect union. We, the people, will speak at last.
I wrote after it's over, anticipating the elections, anticipating things that might change as the result of a change in federal administration. And I knew that I wasn't looking forward to returning to normal, because normal had not ever been a good and just place. But I started asking myself what it is that I can hope for after it's over. Give us rich soil where we can bury the foulness of failure, where we can lay to rest the torment of loss, where we can build memorials befitting the eternal span of compassion and justice, affection and commitment, where we can plant the green seedlings of reconciliation to our history and our future. And that day, October 28th, the total US death count from COVID-19 was 229,357. I would like to invite everybody to unmute and to just take a moment to applaud. This has been stunning.
This has been.
Thank you all.
Brava, brava.
And
Oh,
go to
fantastic.
gallery mode, and it will just be
Fantastic.
wonderful. Such depth of reading. And, you know, we've done 3 of these readings now, and each time it's a different configuration of readers and of poems, and each event has taken on its own life. So you can look back at other events on the at the website for the library where they're posted. You can look back at this one. And at this point, I think we will stop the recording and just open up for any kind of comments you may have or conversation you may want to have. So let's stop recording.